The air in our living room was thick with happiness. It was my daughter Lily's 7th birthday, a perfect day of balloons, sugary cake, and laughter. For a few hours, everything felt bright. Lily was radiant, her face smeared with frosting, her eyes sparkling with a light that I cherished more than anything. This was her day, and it was perfect. She saved one gift for last. It was a large, beautifully wrapped box from my parents, Carol and David, a couple who had turned their grief into a public identity. Despite everything, a foolish part of me held on to hope. Maybe this time, I thought to myself. Maybe this time they would finally see the living girl right in front of them. Lily ripped the paper away, revealing a gorgeous, soft pink dress. It was exactly the kind of frilly, princess-like thing she adored, and her face lit up. She held it against her small frame and spun in a happy circle. "Look, Mommy," she squealed, and for a moment, my heart felt full. Then, she stopped. Her smile vanished, replaced by a serious confusion that didn't belong on a 7-year-old's face. She brought the dress close and whispered, her voice suddenly tiny. "What is this, Mommy?" I knelt down, assuming a stray pin had simply been left in by mistake. I took the dress and ran my hand along the hem. My fingers brushed against something hard and cold, sewn deep into the seam. An icy dread crept up my spine. It was deliberately hidden. With trembling hands, I found the edge and pulled. A small, tarnished silver locket emerged from the pink fabric. My heart hammered as I forced the tiny clasp open. On one side was a faded photo of my sister Sarah, who died as a child. On the other, an elegant, cruel inscription, "My true angel." The air left my lungs. This wasn't a gift. It was a shrine, a costume for my daughter to play the part of their dead one. And the worst part? I wasn't even surprised. It was just the loudest echo of a story I had been living my whole life. To understand the locket, you have to understand my sister Sarah. Before she was a memory, before she was a ghost that haunted our hallways, she was the sun my family revolved around. She was brilliant and funny, with a spark that drew everyone in. She was the golden child in every sense of the word, not just in my parents' memory, but in life. And I was her shadow, the quiet, responsible one who existed in the space she left behind. It wasn't a malicious thing on her part. She was just a kid. But the roles were set early, a silent contract we were all forced to sign. She was the one destined for greatness, and I was the one destined to watch from the sidelines, ever practical, ever present, and ever invisible. Even then, I knew my job was to be the steady earth while she was the dazzling comet. I just never realized that when a comet burns out, all that's left is the cold, dark ground. The clearest memory I have of this dynamic is from my 6th birthday. 2 months earlier, for her 8th, Sarah had been given a brand new, gleaming red bicycle. It was a magnificent thing, with silver streamers on the handlebars and a bell that chimed like tiny bells. She was ecstatic, and the entire day was a celebration of her passage into being a big girl. When my birthday rolled around, I waited with a breathless excitement, imagining a bike of my own. Instead, they wheeled out Sarah's old tricycle. It was faded pink, with one wobbly wheel and a deep scuff on the fender from where she'd crashed it a year prior. I remember introducing my mother, Carol, a woman who could twist any disappointment into a lesson on my own inadequacy. She knelt down, her smile tight, and said, "Sarah needs the challenge of a 2-wheeler, sweetie. You're safer on this." I didn't see safety. I saw Sarah's leftovers. It was the first entry in an internal ledger I didn't even know I was keeping. The first time I understood that her needs would always be an event, while mine were just an afterthought. When Sarah died in a car accident 2 years later, that dynamic didn't just continue, it calcified. It was like her death froze our family in that exact moment, preserving her as the perfect shining child and me as her permanent understudy. My parents didn't just grieve, they became professional mourners. Her room was kept exactly as she left it, a dusty, untouched museum that I was never allowed to enter. Her birthday became a solemn holiday every single year, complete with a sad, uneaten cake placed in the center of the dining table. It was here that I first truly understood my father, David, a man who found it easier to enable my mother's suffocating grief than to connect with the living, breathing daughter he still had. He would pat my shoulder, his eyes distant, and say, "Be strong for your mother." He never said, "Be strong for yourself." His silence was a form of permission, allowing my mother's narrative to become the only story our family was allowed to tell. And that narrative was a masterpiece of self-deception. They told themselves, and anyone who would listen, that their mission was to keep Sarah's memory alive. But it wasn't about her memory. It was about their performance. This noble-sounding quest became the perfect excuse to sideline me at every turn. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, my mother hugged me and whispered, "Oh, Sarah would have been so proud. She was always the smart one." My moment of achievement was instantly reframed as a tribute to my dead sister. The day I got married, my mother fussed over my wedding dress, not because I looked beautiful, but because, as she told my aunt, it's a classic style. Sarah would have picked something just like it. Every milestone, every accomplishment, every choice I made for myself was held up against the impossible standard of a ghost. I wasn't living my life. I was just creating footnotes for hers. When my daughter Lily was born, I prayed things would change. I thought that maybe, just maybe, a new life would be enough to break the spell. But I was wrong. They didn't see Lily as their granddaughter, they saw her as Sarah's legacy. She was their second chance, a vessel to pour all their unresolved grief into. Every compliment was a comparison. "Lily has Sarah's smile," my dad would say, looking past my daughter to see his. Sarah would have loved playing dolls with her. My mom would sigh, as if Lily's own joy was incomplete without a ghost's approval. They were grooming her to be Sarah's replacement, and I was too tired and beaten down to see it clearly until that birthday. That pink dress wasn't just an oversight. The locket wasn't a mistake. It was the ultimate expression of their narrative, a deliberate, cruel act of trying to erase my child and drape her in the memory of another. It was an attempt to put Sarah's shroud on my daughter's shoulders. That night, long after the party was over and Lily was asleep, I sat in the dark, the cold locket resting in my palm. For the first time, the endless string of slights and paper cuts from my childhood didn't just feel like sadness. They felt like a warning. The tricycle, the graduation, the wedding dress, they were all practice runs for this. This was their end game. They hadn't just neglected me, they had systematically tried to render me invisible. And now they were starting on my daughter. The quiet resignation I had lived with my entire life finally curdled into a cold, hard rage. They had hurt me for the last time. Now they had made the mistake of hurting my child. Lying there that night, I realized they would never see me, or my daughter. We were just ghosts haunting the shrine of their perfect dead child. So I decided to make them see the truth instead. As I sat there in the dark, clutching that cold locket, I waited for the tears to come, but they didn't. The familiar ache of sadness was gone, replaced by something else, something cold, quiet, and sharp. It was resolve. In that moment, I knew I was done. I was done begging for scraps of affection from people who saw me as a ghost. The fight was no longer about winning their love. It was about securing my daughter's future, a future completely free of their long, toxic shadow. My objective became laser-focused. Their entire fantasy, their performance as the town's tragic heroes, was funded by one thing, a substantial trust fund left by my maternal grandparents. I remembered the thick envelope I'd been given years ago, filed away and forgotten. The next morning, I climbed into the dusty attic and became an archaeologist of my own family's lies. I dug through old boxes of tax returns and childhood report cards until my fingers closed around a heavy manila folder, simply labeled estate. Inside, I found it, the original trust document. My eyes scanned the legal jargon until they landed on the key phrase, to be used for the support, maintenance, and education of our beloved grandchildren. The S on grandchildren felt like a weapon I had just been handed. Then came the bank statements. For years, my father had sent them to me as a show of transparency, but now I saw it for what it was. Pure arrogance. He never thought I'd actually look. I spread them across the living room floor, and the story they told was damning. Annual $5,000 withdrawals to the Sarah Memorial Foundation, their own vanity charity. A $30,000 payment for a memorial garden renovation that I now realized was just them redoing their entire backyard. The final piece fell into place in my email inbox. I searched for my father's name and scrolled back 3 years. There it was. An email solemnly explaining a large withdrawal for specialized grief counseling for him and my mother. I cross-referenced the date with my own calendar, and a bitter laugh escaped my lips. It was the exact week they had taken a luxury cruise to Alaska, a trip they'd justified because, as they'd told everyone, Sarah always wanted to see the glaciers. It was calculated, premeditated fraud. I had it all. The documents, the statements, the emails. It was a perfect, undeniable timeline of their hypocrisy. My plan solidified right then and there. I wouldn't confront them with tears or screams in the privacy of their home. I would confront them publicly, using their own numbers against them. I would do it at the one place their narrative was sacred, the one place they felt completely safe. I had the proof. I had the plan. All that was left was to choose the right moment to burn their perfect world to the ground. The annual Sarah Memorial Foundation charity luncheon was my parents' masterpiece of performance art. It was held in the main ballroom of the local country club, a cavernous room with gaudy chandeliers and tables draped in somber gray linen. The air was thick with the scent of wilting floral centerpieces and a cloying performative grief. This was their kingdom, a room filled with their friends and supporters, all carefully curated over 2 decades of telling the same sad story. These people didn't know me. They knew the myth of Carol and David, the tragic, noble couple who had bravely dedicated their lives to honoring their lost angel. I sat at a small table in the back, the manila folder in my lap feeling as heavy as a stone. My heart was a cold, steady drum against my ribs. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there to correct the public record. My father stood at the podium, his voice thick with a well-practiced emotion that I knew was as hollow as a drum. He spoke of Sarah's laugh, her dreams, the bottomless void her absence had left in their lives. He was a master orator, I had to give him that. He wove a tale of a perfect child stolen too soon, and by the time he finished, dabbing a handkerchief at his perfectly dry eyes, the room was wrapped in a respectful, sympathetic hush. The applause that followed was quiet and reverent, a soft patter of hands that affirmed their narrative, validating their 2 decades of pain. They were heroes in this room. My mother, from her seat of honor at the front, looked up at him with an expression of beatific sorrow, playing her part to perfection. And that was my cue. I pushed my chair back, the sound of its legs scraping against the polished floorboards echoing loudly in the sanctified quiet. Every head turned towards me, a ripple of confusion spreading through the room. I was not on the program. As I stood, I met my mother's eyes. She gave me a look of pure, concentrated venom, a silent, furious command to sit down, to become invisible as I had always been trained to do. I held her gaze for a single second, and then I broke it, not in submission but in dismissal. Holding my folder like a shield, I walked calmly and deliberately towards the stage. My footsteps felt thunderous in the sudden, tense silence. This was no longer a memorial. It was a courtroom. I reached the podium and adjusted the microphone, the low hum of feedback a prelude to the coming storm. My father looked at me, his face a mask of bewilderment. "What are you doing?" he whispered, his stage grief forgotten. I ignored him and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. "Thank you, Dad," I began, my voice miraculously clear and steady, amplified throughout the ballroom. Everyone here knows how devoted my parents are to honoring Sarah's memory. I admire that devotion. But today, I want to talk about the cost of it. The whispers started almost immediately, a nervous hiss spreading from table to table. This was not a tribute. My father started to move towards me, his hand outstretched to put a comforting arm around my shoulder and gently lead me away, to save me from my own apparent breakdown. But he was too slow. I was already pulling out my first exhibit, a professionally printed, full-color pie chart. I placed it on the document projector, and the image flashed onto the large screen behind me, stark and undeniable. "This is the trust fund our grandparents left for us," I explained, my voice level and factual. "As you can see, 85% of it has been spent on memorial projects and donations in Sarah's name." I used a pen to tap the screen, indicating a sliver of the chart so small it was barely visible. "And this 3% is what has been allocated for the college fund of their living grandchild. My daughter, Lily." The whispers grew louder, morphing into murmurs of shock and disbelief. I didn't pause to let it sink in. I swapped the pie chart for a new document, my movements precise and economical. In the summer of 2022, $30,000 was withdrawn for what was described to the estate lawyer as a therapeutic grief retreat for my parents. I projected the damning email. "A necessary expense for their mental well-being, as you can see." My father's face was turning a pale, sickly white, his jaw slack. "And here," I said, placing another paper beside the first, "is the invoice from a local roofing company for a full roof replacement on their house. It's dated the very same week." There was an audible gasp from someone in the front row. The room fell into a shocked, dead silence. That silence was broken by my mother. She shot to her feet, her chair screeching against the floorboards as it flew backwards. "How dare you?" she shrieked, her voice shaking with an uncontrollable, violent rage. "This is a private family matter. You have no right to air our laundry in front of these people." All eyes snapped to her. The mask of the grieving, sainted mother had shattered, revealing something ugly and furious and cornered beneath. For the first time, I turned from the audience and looked directly at her. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting her fury hang in the air. Then my voice dropped, but it carried through the microphone with icy, devastating precision. "No, you made it a public matter." I reached into the tote bag I'd left by the lectern and pulled out the soft pink dress, letting it unfold like a terrible flag. "You made it public when you sewed a dead child's locket into a birthday dress for my living child." I pulled the tarnished locket from my pocket and dropped it onto the lectern. It landed with a small, heavy thud that sounded like a gavel. I held her gaze, refusing to back down. "This isn't grief," I said quietly. "This is an obsession." My voice was steady, but every person in that room heard the steel in my final words. "And my daughter will not be your next victim." My parents were frozen, caught in the spotlight of their own making. Their faces were a grotesque mixture of horror, disbelief, and raw public humiliation. The power they had wielded for 2 decades, a power built entirely on the currency of communal sympathy, had evaporated in less than 5 minutes. There was no applause. There were no whispers. There was only a thick, ringing, and deeply satisfying silence. And in that ringing silence, I didn't feel anger or victory. I just felt quiet. For the first time, I was the one who got to walk away. The moment I stepped out of that ballroom and into the crisp, clean air, my phone began to buzz. And buzz. And buzz. It was a predictable symphony of destruction, the frantic death throes of a narrative I had just assassinated. The first voicemail I checked was from my mother, a raw, incoherent scream of pure rage and shredded pride. She called me ungrateful, vicious, a monster who would desecrate her sister's memory for attention. The second voicemail was from my father, his voice dripping with a condescending, wounded tone that he had perfected over a lifetime. He explained how I had misunderstood everything, how I had twisted their boundless love and their unending pain into something ugly because I was just, well, I had always been too sensitive, hadn't I? It was the same tired script they had used my entire life to manage me, to keep me in my place. I listened to the first 10 seconds of each message, not with anger or pain, but with a strange clinical detachment. I felt like a doctor observing a disease. Then, calmly, I deleted them. I blocked both their numbers, the simple act feeling more profound and final than any shouting match ever could. 2 days later, my lawyer called. He sounded almost cheerful. They had agreed to everything, a full and immediate separation of the trust funds, no negotiations, no arguments, just a swift and silent surrender. The threat of having their fraudulent activities formally exposed in a court of law was all it took. Their carefully constructed world was not built to withstand the harsh glare of actual sunlight. It was a fragile thing, spun from lies and sympathy, and it disintegrated on contact. 1 year later, the silence that followed that day was the most beautiful, peaceful sound I had ever known. We moved. We didn't go far, just a few towns over, but it felt like a different universe, a new dimension where the air was lighter and easier to breathe. Our new life was built in a small, sunny 2-bedroom apartment that we could now easily afford, a place chosen for its big windows and proximity to a park with good swings. There were no sad, accusing portraits on the walls, no rooms that were off limits, no ghosts haunting the corners. Our home was filled with Lily's crayon drawings taped to the fridge, the scent of us figuring out new cookie recipes, and so much easy, unforced laughter. It was on Lily's 8th birthday that the change felt most real. We spent the morning in the kitchen, our hands covered in flour, making a slightly lopsided, gloriously imperfect chocolate cake. As we put the 8 little candles on top, her face glowing with pure, uncomplicated joy in the flickering light, I realized this was the first family celebration I'd ever had that wasn't tainted by the shadow of someone else's grief. It was just ours. Wholly and completely ours. After the cake, I handed her a small, simple box wrapped in bright blue paper, her favorite color. She opened it carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft white cotton, was a delicate, shining silver locket, simple and clean. For a split second, I saw a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, a faint memory of the last locket she'd received. the one that felt cold and heavy with secrets. My heart ached for that tiny, invisible scar, but I just smiled gently. "Go on," I whispered. "It's for you." She picked it up, her small fingers fumbling with the clasp for a moment before it clicked open. Her eyes went wide. On one side was a tiny, perfect photograph of her, caught mid-laugh during our day at the park last week. On the other side was a photo of me, looking at her, my own smile full of warmth and adoration. Her face broke into a huge, radiant grin, a smile so bright it could have powered the whole city. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with happy tears. "It's for us, Mommy." "Yes," I thought to myself, my own eyes getting misty. Just us. Our story. Past, present, and future, all in one tiny, perfect circle. I heard a final update about my parents a few months ago, through a distant cousin who called out of the blue to, I think, gauge whether I was still a monster. She told me they had sold the house that was supposed to be a permanent shrine to my sister, the one I grew up in. The Sarah Memorial Foundation, their public platform for sympathy, was quietly and unceremoniously dissolved. They packed up everything and moved to a state halfway across the country, a place where no one knew their story, where they couldn't be the town's tragic heroes anymore. It turned out that their grief, so profound and all-consuming, couldn't survive without an audience. Their power wasn't in their pain itself, it was in the sympathy they could harvest from it. Once that was gone, there was nothing left for them but the quiet, empty truth of their lives. They send a generic Christmas card each year, addressed to Lily's guardian. I throw it in the recycling bin, unopened. They have no power here. They are just ghosts from a different life. Looking back, I see that their home was a house of mirrors, endlessly reflecting only the past, trapping everyone inside with the same distorted images. My daughter and I, we live in a house of windows, and every single one of them opens up to the future. It's a future we get to build ourselves, on our own terms, defined by our own joy. True liberation, I've learned, isn't about winning a fight or having the last word. It's about realizing you don't have to be in the fight at all. It's about having the strength to simply close the door and walk towards a life that is completely, peacefully, and wonderfully your own. It's the quiet joy of a lopsided birthday cake and a locket that holds not a ghost, but a promise. A promise of a new beginning, written by us, for us. I learned that sometimes the only way to find your place in the world is to leave the one you were assigned. If you've ever had to become your own hero, leave a comment below. I see you.